The voicemail came at 6:47 in the morning, while I was still in my scrubs from a night shift, eating cold toast over the kitchen sink. "We've made a decision as a family." My brother's voice was flat, rehearsed. "You're no longer welcome at Sunday dinners. You're no longer welcome at the house. And frankly, after what you pulled at Christmas, we think it's best if you just step back from all of it." There was a pause. Then my sister-in-law's voice, softer but somehow colder. "We all agree, Reeve. This is for the best." I stood there with the toast halfway to my mouth. They hadn't even called. They had sent a voicemail. A voicemail at 6:47 in the morning, like they were canceling a dentist appointment. I set the toast down on the counter. I didn't cry. I didn't call back. I went to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I'm a physiotherapist. I work with people relearning how to walk after strokes, after accidents, after their bodies have done something catastrophic and unexpected. The first thing you learn in that job is that panic helps no one. You assess, you plan, you act. So that's what I did. I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, and I started making a list. The first thing on the list was the storage unit. My brother. I'll call him by what he was to me, which was the person who was supposed to be on my side, had been using a storage unit I'd been paying for since 2019, $142 a month, pre-authorized from my checking account, for a unit in Mississauga that held his old furniture, his hockey equipment, and what he once described as important documents, but were almost certainly just boxes he hadn't unpacked since his last move. He hadn't asked me to keep paying it. He'd just never stopped the payment, and I'd never asked him to. I canceled it that morning. I didn't call the facility. I went online, logged into my account, the one in my name, because I'd been the one who set it up, selected End Storage Agreement, chose the date of the following month, and clicked Confirm. He would get a letter in the mail. Not an email, a letter, because I'd opted for paper notices when I set the account up. It would arrive in about 10 days, which meant he'd have 30 days after that to clear out the unit before the locks changed. Plenty of notice. Perfectly reasonable. No anger required. The second thing on my list was the cell phone plan. 4 years ago, my sister-in-law had asked if she could be added to my plan because I had a better rate through my employer's group discount. I'd said yes. Of course I'd said yes. She was family. It was $47 a month more on my bill. I logged into my carrier account, navigated to the plan management page, and removed her line. The change would take effect at the end of the billing cycle. She wouldn't know until her phone stopped working. I looked at my list. I had 2 more items, but those could wait. I closed my laptop, put on fresh clothes, and drove to work. Here is what they called what I pulled at Christmas. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had been living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Burlington for 11 years. She was 81. She had osteoarthritis in both knees, a heart condition that required monitoring, and the kind of quiet dignity that made her refuse to ask for help even when she needed it badly. She had a small pension, some savings, and a reverse mortgage on the condo she'd sold in 2011. It was enough to live on, barely, if nothing went wrong. Something went wrong in October. Her building raised the rent by $400 a month. In Ontario, legal, unfortunately, under the rules for vacant units, she'd moved in after 2018, so she wasn't protected by the older rent control guidelines. $400 a month more on a fixed income. Starting February 1st, she called me. She didn't call my brother. She called me, because she always called me, because I was the one who drove her to her cardiology appointments, and picked up her prescriptions, and sat with her on Saturday afternoons, watching British baking shows and pretending not to notice when she fell asleep in her chair. I found her a new apartment within 2 weeks. A seniors building in Hamilton, closer to me, with an elevator and a pharmacy on the ground floor, and a superintendent named Mr. Okafor who shoveled her walkway without being asked. The rent was $200 less than what she'd been paying in Burlington. I helped her pack. I rented a van. I moved her on a Saturday in November with the help of 2 colleagues from work. My brother and his wife did not help. They were, apparently, busy. What they were not too busy for was showing up at my grandmother's new apartment 3 weeks later to inform her that she should have consulted the whole family before making such a big decision, that Hamilton was far, that they were worried about her, that perhaps she should consider a proper retirement residence, and, this part my grandmother told me quietly, looking at her hands, that I had a tendency to take over and make decisions for people without asking. At Christmas, I made the mistake of saying out loud what I thought about that. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I said, at the dinner table, that I thought it was interesting to be accused of overstepping by people who hadn't lifted a single box. That was what I pulled at Christmas. By January, they had decided as a family that I needed to step back. What none of them knew, what I had never mentioned because it wasn't something I talked about, was how much of my grandmother's life I had been quietly funding for the past 4 years. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just steadily, the way water fills a container. Her dental work, when her insurance ran out. $2,300 over 2 visits. A new hearing aid when the old one broke and the warranty had expired. 100. The gap in her drug coverage every year when she hit the deductible ceiling. Anywhere from $400 to $700 depending on the year. The van rental for the November move, $340. The groceries I brought every other week because I was coming anyway and it was easier than watching her ration things. I had never kept a running total. That winter, for the first time, I added it up. Somewhere just over 11,000 in 4 years. Not because I was asked. Not because I expected anything. Because she was my grandmother and I loved her and she needed it and I could. I made myself another cup of coffee and I looked at the number on the screen for a while. Then I added it to my list. Not as something I was owed. I knew I wasn't owed anything, but I needed to see it clearly. I needed to understand what I had actually been participating in and for how long. March came. My grandmother's health declined a little. Nothing catastrophic, just the slow accumulation of being 81. And she had to see her cardiologist more frequently. I took her. I sat in the waiting room with her crossword puzzle books and bad coffee from the machine down the hall. My brother sent a text once asking how she was doing. I replied with a brief update. He sent back a thumbs up. In April, she told me something that changed the shape of everything. We were sitting in her new living room. It was a Sunday. The baking show was on, but neither of us was watching it. I've updated my will, she said. She was looking at the television. Her hands were folded in her lap. I didn't say anything. I did it in February, she paused. Before things got complicated with your brother. You don't have to explain, I said. I want to. She looked at me then. Your grandfather and I built what we built together. And your mother, she stopped again. My mother had died when I was 19. A car accident on the 401. Your mother would have handled things differently than your brother has. I think she would have handled things more like you. She asked me to call her lawyer the following week. Not to discuss the will. She was clear that she wasn't asking my input on any of that. Just to confirm an appointment she'd already made. I called. I confirmed I didn't ask any questions. In May, she was admitted to hospital for 3 days with a cardiac event that turned out to be less serious than it initially appeared. I was there within an hour of the call. I stayed until they told me she was stable and sleeping, and then I drove home at 2 in the morning and sat in my car in the parking garage for a while before I could make myself go inside. My brother visited once on the second day. He stayed for 40 minutes. When she was discharged, I arranged for a home care worker to come 3 mornings a week while she recovered. It took 4 phone calls and an afternoon navigating the provincial system. I did not tell anyone I had done this. My brother called me that week, not to help, to inform me that he'd been speaking to a senior's residence in Oakville. A nice one, he said, which I understood to mean expensive, and that he thought it was time to have a serious conversation about grandmother's long-term care needs, and that he felt strongly that the whole family should be involved in decisions going forward. We're her family, he said. So am I said, Reeve. His voice had that particular tone, the one that had been managing me since I was 12, patient, slightly tired, as if I was the one being unreasonable. This isn't about you. I held the phone and looked out my window at the street below. There was a kid on a bike doing slow circles on the sidewalk. I watched him for a moment. You're right, I said. It isn't. I hung up. The letter from grandmother's lawyer arrived on a Tuesday in June. I had been expecting it in the abstract, but not then, not quite yet. She had died on Sunday morning quietly in her sleep. Mr. Okafor had called me because I was listed as her emergency contact. By the time I got there, she was already at rest, and the building was very quiet, and the baking show was playing on the television. Because she'd fallen asleep watching it and the timer had never gone off. I handled the arrangements. I called the funeral home. I called her church. I sat with her pastor in a small office that smelled like carpet cleaner and grief, and we talked about what she had been and what she had loved and what she had wanted people to remember. I called my brother from the parking lot. When were you going to tell me? He said. He sounded genuinely hurt. I'm telling you now, I said. It happened 2 days ago. 2 days, he stopped. Reeve. She was my grandmother too. I know, we should have been there, we should have. His voice cracked a little, which I had not expected. We should have been included. I thought about 40 minutes on the second hospital day. I thought about the text with the thumbs up. I thought about the Saturday afternoons with the crossword books. All those years, all those drives, all those prescription pickups. All that quiet, unacknowledged labor conducted in the background of a family that had apparently decided I took over too much. The funeral is on Friday, I said. St. Andrews, 2 o'clock. I'll send you the details. I hung up. The will reading was held at the lawyer's office in downtown Hamilton 2 weeks after the funeral. The lawyer's name was Ms. Adeyemi. She had a very tidy office and a way of delivering information with no editorial comment whatsoever, which I respected enormously. My brother and his wife arrived first. They were dressed appropriately, which surprised me a little. My sister-in-law had been crying recently, I could tell from her eyes. My brother looked like he was holding himself together with some effort. I arrived wearing a gray cardigan I'd had for years, slightly too large, the cuffs starting to unravel. I had my hair pulled back. I looked tired because I was tired. I sat in the chair closest to the door and I looked at my hands. My brother glanced at me when I came in. Something crossed his face, not quite pity but adjacent to it. He looked away. Ms. Adeyemi entered the room at exactly 10 o'clock. She did not make small talk. She opened the file. She began with the personal effects. The jewelry to be divided in specific ways she described clearly and without sentiment, the furniture, the small collection of books my grandmother had loved. Then the financial assets. The condo sale proceeds had been managed carefully over the years. There were GCs, a small RRSP that had converted to a RRIF, some Canada savings bonds she'd held for a long time. The total value of the liquid assets came to approximately $214,000. I heard my sister-in-law inhale softly. Miss Adeyemi looked up over her reading glasses. The estate, she said, is to be distributed as follows. She read the allocation. My brother received 30 fisers, which was described in the will as a recognition of the grandchildren she had loved equally. The remainder, $184,000, plus the personal effects she had specified, was left to me. There was a note. Miss Adeyemi read it in the same level tone she'd used for everything else. To my granddaughter Reeve, who showed up, not just at the end. Always, I know this world doesn't always keep track of that kind of thing. I wanted to. My brother said it was a mistake. Not loudly. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed, carefully, with control. He said their grandmother had been unwell and that decisions made in this last year of a person's life should be. He used the word scrutinized. Adeyemi informed him, without blinking, that the will had been updated in February, following 2 independent assessments confirming full testamentary capacity, and had been witnessed and notarized according to Ontario requirements. My sister-in-law reached for her husband's arm. He said that I had influenced her, that I had taken advantage of my access, that no one had even known I was handling her finances, which was itself suspicious. I raised my head and looked at him. I was handling her grocery runs, I said, and her pharmacy pickups and her cardiology appointments, and her move, and her home care after the hospital. I kept my voice completely even. You're welcome to the receipts if you'd like to scrutinize them. He stared at me. I didn't do any of it for this, I said. I did it because she needed it and you weren't there. His face did something complicated. I watched it happen. You can contest the will, Ms. Adeyemi said calmly, addressing my brother. You're entitled to consult with a lawyer. However, I should inform you that your grandmother anticipated this possibility and included a clause in the will. Any challenge to the distribution, regardless of outcome, would result in the forfeiture of the $30,000 bequest. Silence. My sister-in-law's hand tightened on his arm. He looked at the table. He looked at me. He looked at the lawyer. We'll need time, he said finally. Of course, Ms. Adeyemi said. He didn't contest it. The storage unit was cleared out, eventually. I extended the deadline by a month because I am not, whatever he thinks, someone who enjoys watching people scramble. He came with a rented truck and took everything out on a Saturday. I know because the facility sent me a confirmation that the unit had been vacated. He didn't call me. His wife's phone line was removed from my plan on the date I had scheduled. She called from his phone afterward. I let it go to voicemail. She said that she hoped we could eventually move past this, I found that interesting. Given the circumstances, I didn't call back. I took possession of my grandmother's apartment for the last month of the lease. Mr. Okafor helped me carry down the boxes. He told me she had been a wonderful tenant and that she used to bring him butter tarts from the bakery on Locke Street. Because she said everyone deserved a proper butter tart now and then. I stood in the empty living room on the last day, the afternoon light coming through the window she'd liked, the one that faced west. There was a photograph on the windowsill that I'd missed when we packed. A small one, in a frame I recognized from her old Burlington apartment. She was young in it, late 30s maybe, standing somewhere in a backyard I didn't recognize, laughing at something off camera. I didn't know what she'd been laughing at. I would never know. That was the part of grief nobody tells you about. Not the absence of the person, but the closing off of all the questions you never thought to ask. I put the photograph in my bag, not as a keepsake exactly, more as a reminder that she had been a whole person before I knew her. That she had laughed like that, unbothered, in some backyard in some summer, years before the cardiology appointments and the rent increases and the slow logistics of getting old with dignity. That she had chosen to remember me in the end in the way she had. I turned off the light and closed the door behind me. My brother texted once, about a month later. He said he'd been thinking and that maybe they'd been too hasty in January and that he hoped we could talk. I read the message. I thought about the voicemail at 6:47 in the morning. I thought about the thumbs-up text. I thought about 40 minutes on the second hospital day. I didn't reply that day. I needed to think about what I actually wanted. Not what was expected, not what was polite, not what would smooth things over so Christmas could happen again like nothing had changed. What I actually wanted. Here's what I eventually decided. I don't believe in permanent estrangement as a goal. I don't think it serves anyone. But I also don't believe in pretending that something didn't happen because acknowledging it would be uncomfortable. That's what my family had always done. Looked away from the uncomfortable thing until enough time had passed that it seemed unreasonable to bring it up. That's how $11,000 in years of Saturday afternoons go unacknowledged. That's how you end up with a voicemail at 6:47 in the morning, as if a family is something you can cancel by leaving a message. I texted back, eventually. I said I was open to talking but that I needed it to be a real conversation, not a reset. I said there were things I needed him to actually hear, not just to wait out. He said, okay. We haven't talked yet. It's been 3 weeks since that exchange. Maybe we will. Maybe the version of him that said okay means it, and we'll sit down somewhere and he'll actually listen and something real will come out of it. Or maybe we won't. Either way, I've stopped waiting to be acknowledged by people who were only paying attention when there was something to gain. My grandmother left me a note that said I showed up. Always. That's the only ledger that ever mattered. The rest of them can sort out their own accounts. I still have the photograph. It's on my windowsill now, the one that faces west, the same as hers. She's still laughing at something I'll never see. I've started to think that might be the point.